Okay, I am recording. So, um, I want to kind of cover, like I said, I want to cover the next kind of lecture component for this next week, and then we'll meet again to talk about it. Um, we are looking at Part B, Section 2, whatever you want to call it. And you should be able to see my screen at this point. So, the understanding research methods. We're going to look at a couple things. We're going to look at why researchers review the literature. We're going to look at locating literature in electronic databases. We're going to structure the literature review, connecting the literature to your study, preparing to write a critical review, and so on all the way through. So we're going to kind of run through some of those. And then we are going to, from there, also talk about the structure of a research paper. And we probably won't, we'll do bits and pieces because every one of your labs will cover some of those components, okay? All right, so let's roll forward. So what is a literature review? The literature review is the systematic review of the studies and theories that are part of the existing academic literature. So let's give you an example. My research is on sexual assault. So when I review the literature, I look at the literature relating to cases of sexual assault, particularly victim and the perceptions of the victim. So I look at how perceptions of her prior sexual behavior have affected her case in the judicial system. I specifically look at emotions. So how do emotions affect the perceptions of her, whether she's crying or whether she's upset? All of these things create stepping stones for our current understanding of a topic. So you build up a literature of previous research which says this piece of information knows this piece of information knows that, or this study provides this study provides that. And as you kind of build it up, it kind of creates this stepwise fashion of understanding. And previous research becomes the stepping stone for future research, and future research is built on those stepping stones. So that's what the literature review is. It's just a way to provide an understanding of what's been done before. The reason that's important sorry, I'm going to try to stop spinning. I know that drives me crazy when I watch the video. I need a chair that doesn't spin is what I need. The literature is important because it is the basis of our current study. It tells us what we're doing, how we're doing. It gives us a way to quantify and to demonstrate a need for our study. So when I wanted to study sexual assault and how emotions played into that, I had to look and say, is this an issue? Is this a problem? Is this something that is important? Some of the literature I found said that lawyers specifically tell victims not to be emotional, even though some of that literature goes on to then say, but a victim who's not being emotional actually looks like they're not telling the truth. And so those are contradictory. That is a spot in the literature that was a weakness that I thought I could fill. And I was able to do that by doing research then on those topics. Sometimes you will find a lot of stuff in the literature. So say you wanted to study autism. Autism is going to have a ton of previous literature. If you want to study stress or anxiety, there'll be a ton of literature. But if you want to study something new, there's going to be less. One of the example I always think of right now that's just exploding in terms of research is anything to do with social media, right? So social media is relatively new in the grand scheme of society. And so prior to 10 years ago, there probably was no research on it. And in the last 10 years, research has slowly been building up on that topic. As you build more and more and people begin to question and do research studies, it creates that base of knowledge. And that base of knowledge can then be used as you kind of move forward. So that is what a literature review is. I'm going to pause here for a second, my recording, and I'll be back. So I'm going to try to add one other thing for me, not for you guys, but it'll help me here. Okay, I'm back. couldn't find what I was looking for. I was trying to find to see if there was a timestamp that I can put on there so I can keep track of how long I've been recording. I'm going to try to keep these to 15, 20 minutes at a time, just so that they're not huge. And if something goes wrong with one of them, I can kind of jump into a different one. Okay, so that was the literature review. Like I said, the reviewing the literature has many purposes. It frames the current research in context. It helps the researcher narrow their question. It may help the researcher identify replication opportunities, or it helps you discover ideas because you can find what people suggest is going to be the next big thing by looking in the future research. It sometimes uncovers pitfalls or cautions. It finds theories or concepts to adapt. It may be useful to define measures. And by finding measures, it's like, we do this in my undergraduate class. When you go to study something, you have to find a scale or an instrument or a technique that's used. Why would you recreate that when you can go back to that literature and find someone else who has done it? Why reinvent the wheel every single time? We shouldn't. And that's bad science to do that. Because by building a structure that is based on previous concepts and ideas and measures, you actually strengthen those. If it doesn't work, you change it or you adapt it. But every time you replicate and use that same measure in something else, you get information about the usefulness of that measure. So I think that's key. And then you kind of learn how to do something by example, how to structure the literature review. You learn what it goes into. In fact, the more literature reviews you read, the better you get at writing them, kind of like anything else in this world. So if you look at replication studies, one of the things that you can do by finding the literature is you can decide, am I going to replicate a study based on what's previously been done? Psychology is in a bit of a replication crisis right now, at least if you listen to a lot of people and what they talk about psychology. And the problem is that we're having a difficult time replicating what other people have done. And I think that has to do more with the complexity of the variables than with psychology having an issue as a science. That's my opinion. But there's two types of replication you can do. You can do strict replication and you can do modified replication. And that strict replication, researchers try to mimic the original study in every important aspect of that study. So you take their study and you say, I'm going to do the exact same thing. If you can't replicate it in that situation, it raises questions about their original study. And the reason that it does is because you have to question whether their conclusions were accurate or not if you can't replicate them. That's what science is, right? The science is essentially you being able to replicate someone else's ideas and concepts and studies based on the information they give you. If you can't, then you got to question their research. There's also modified replications, and these are more often what happens, where the researcher will sometimes modify a piece of the original research, some aspect of it by changing, the population, or changing, they use the scale on autism from this individual. I'm going to use the scale on autism about this individual. That's what I did. I changed small components of previous research that had looked at emotions in sexual assault victims. Specifically, one of the things I looked at is I want to see what happens when there's two different points in time. So a victim may be emotional immediately following the event, but what happens during trial? Because a lot of the research I read said that jurors are making their decisions based on the representation on the day of. Maybe there is no effect of those things. And actually, I found that there was. My research demonstrated that the victim's emotions were important the most when they were consistent. So as long as the victim was consistent, if she was calm to begin with and calm later on, there was less of an issue. If there was inconsistencies is when issues kind of start to rise in terms of how they judge those kind of cases. So what do literature reviews do? The literature review kind of stands alone, but are also most common as a section of an empirical article, a dissertation, or a book, because you're providing the basis for your current ideas. And so you kind of have to do that every time you talk about it. This is particularly the case in theses and dissertations. This is a large part of any kind of dissertation or thesis. In a thesis, you're talking about master's level work. in a dissertation, you're talking about PhD level. And thesis can also be honors or undergraduate level. But in those cases, a large part of what you're doing is creating a literature review. That's a large chapter of that process. Literature reviews also can provide context for the reader. Like I said, when I was studying my topic on emotions and sexual assault victims, part of that context was the idea that lawyers are encouraging victims not to show their emotions, despite the fact that when we did that in front of juries, they were wondering why the victim wasn't emotional. And so they're responding to the victim's lack of emotion, even though they were encouraged to demonstrate that. That is a context for my study, and it's an important context. Literature reviews also demonstrate that the author is well versed in the relevant research. So if you're reading someone's, I'm going to try to expand that just a little bit. If you're reading someone's literature and they miss a key aspect of the literature, kind of question the importance of their research. And I've seen this happen before. I was at a conference. My supervisor in graduate school studies domestic violence, particularly battered women syndrome. And she was sitting in the room, and this other person was giving a talk on battered women syndrome. And my advisor is, one of the known experts in that area, and not one time did this person mention my advisor's research. That makes you question this other person's research, because they're missing a whole, they're missing a chunk of that literature, and when they do that, you question what they've done and how they've done it, because they're missing that piece, right? It's like if your mechanic took your car to fix it, and when they turned it back to you, there was pieces missing that he gives to you and says, here's some pieces, I don't know what they do. You're like, what? That's not how this works. All the pieces that my car came with should be back in the car and functioning. And so we want that piece to be whole. We want that to be a fairly thorough review. Now, it doesn't have to include everything, because that's impossible, but it can include a lot of them. So that's kind of what a literature review is. When you talk about locating that literature, you're probably going to use an electronic database. And those electronic databases are usually something through a library or through a source that you can search for a topic. And that most original reporting of empirical research appears in a scholarly journal, and those scholarly journal can be found in a database. The problem with this, and there's a couple issues with this that I'll talk about. One, for me, that hides science a little bit and puts it, they call it putting it up behind a paywall, right? Is that, hey, you want to see this great research that I've done? You want to learn about science? Well, you got to pay this money to get to it. Fortunately, most schools have access to databases that allow you to search those things. And I'm going to talk about another technique that you can use as well. But databases are basically curated collections of published, scholarly, peer-reviewed work that can be searched to find specific articles. So if you go to PsycInfo or PsycArticles, those are the two key ones. Let's see if you guys can see this. PsycInfo or PsycArticles are common ones for us. Okay, so PsycInfo, PsycArticles are ones that you can do, and that are available through our library. Actually, I think only PsycArticles is, but PsycArticles actually is a database that provides you with a PDF of the article, so that works fine. You can also do Google Scholar. Google Scholar, I think, is just as good a resource, and one that shouldn't be discounted because it says Google in it, right? Now, it's different than regular Google. Google Scholar allows you to search for a topic, and it pulls up scholarly articles based on that. So it's kind of a free version of this. And if you add the words like PDF or something at the end, you can frequently find a PDF version of those articles. And so it's an easy, free way to do some of these things. Now, not all of them will be free that you see on Google Scholar, but a lot of them will provide a free version of that. The PsycInfo or PsycArticles you can get to through our library. And maybe I'll see if I can't pull that up. I'm going to pause you again, see if I can't pull that up and show it to you. Okay, let's stop sharing the screen and I'll share a different screen. So let's see, I meant to do this before I started back, but okay, so you should be able to see the Google Scholar screen again. So all you have to do is search it Scholar at the top here, scholar.google.com. You can search for a topic. So let's search for one of my articles, right? So if you do sexual assault and emotions, and if you add the words PDF, a lot of times you will see it pop up, right? And you can kind of see that there are a number of articles that pop up in relation to this. So emotional dysregulation and drinking to cope as predictors and consequences of alcohol-involved sexual assault. And you'll see that there's a PDF link here. If you click that, it will download the PDF of that research, right? So there's a lot of research that it's just an easy and simple way to do that, right? You can search by authors. So if I search by Klippenstein, Mark, if I can spell my name correctly, right? So if you do a search for my name, it pulls up research of my research that pulls up there. And again, the goal is so that if you know the author that does a certain amount of research, you can search those things. And a lot of them have PDFs out there of those research articles. One of the places that you can search that's really a good place to do is ResearchGate. ResearchGate is kind of Facebook for researchers. And so we often will put our research up there. And so to make it a little bit more free access to outside of the journals. Okay, that is one way to do that. You can also go to our library page. Let's see if I can't access our library page. This may take a second. So on, I actually don't know where the library page is anymore on this. Let's just do a search for ECOK library. Right, so if you go to the library page, it gives you services. If you go to the databases, right, and then you go to P, it will give you those articles that are available. So you can go to PsycArticles. Don't know if it still shows that page, but you can search. It's asking for my password and all that stuff. But if you enter that in, you can search it just like you would a regular database, like Google, and you're able to find out that literature and how it kind of works. So another great way to do that. Let me pull back up that thing. So that is electronic databases, right? And a good way to do that. I'm going to save that thing because I made some changes. Ways to search the database. You can use different techniques. You can identify the databases most commonly used. I suggest PsycInfo or Google Scholar. Those are the two key ones. PsycArticles or Google Scholar. PsycInfo does just as well, but we don't have access to that one through the library. Some schools do. Create a list of terms. So if you're searching, the hardest thing that you're going to come across, the hardest thing about finding the literature is actually figuring out the terms that people use. So if you want to search for emotions and sexual assault, what are people calling it? What is it actually called when people study that? Cognitive test anxiety is a good example. If you just type in test anxiety, you may not pull up what you're thinking you're going to get. And so you have to figure out those terms, and that can be challenging. You can also look up technical knowledge, so look up terms in the database you identified. You can use Google Scholar again for that. You can look in an article that you like. There's usually key terms listed behind the abstract. All of those are great ways to figure out how to study it. You can use different operators. So they give the example of, using and. So you can do adaptive and testing. So that means it's looking not just for one of these words, it's looking for both of these words. And you can do and not. So you can say, I want to find this, but not that. So you want to find about testing, but not at the college level and more at the junior high level. You can say not college. And by doing that, it'll remove those components. And it's if you can learn how to do that, they're great techniques, and it really does help you get the literature that you need. Once you find the literature, you're going to have to filter through it, because you may get 50, 100, or 1,000 articles. Well, now what? Well, now you got to refine your search. And by refining your search, that means, okay, I found articles on autism. Now, what do you want to look at in terms of autism? Is it learning styles? Is it within the school system? Is it testing of? What is it specifically you want to do? And then you have to refine your search from there. You'll probably figure out which articles you want to start looking at by looking through the abstracts. And those are those short summaries of those articles. And they often provide the research question, the data collected, and the key findings. Our annual reviews, a lot of times research is provided in these annual reviews, which summarize the literature on a specific theme. So big themes, depression, anxiety, some of those things will have an annual review which reviews the literature on that topic. And so sometimes it's a great way to find out more information. Once you find and locate those electronic databases, you're going to want to document your literature search. Where did you look? What did you find? What parameters did you use? How many items did you return? How did you sort which ones you wanted? Now, this is more important as you get into those theses and dissertations, because sometimes it's hard to refine something. So keep track of what you're searching for. And so it can just be helpful when you're writing up your research. Okay, so before I get to structuring the literature review, I'm going to stop there because I think that'll provide a nice little short version, and then I'll continue on here in a little bit. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to make myself large again for me. I don't know what. Anyways, and I'm going to stop recording. So that's kind of what a literature review is and where that literature review can be found. I will come back on and continue on in a little bit in a second video. All right, talk to you in a little bit.